Good afternoon. Mon nom est Daniel Bélan. Je suis le directeur de l'Institut d'études canadiennes de McGill. La vision de l'Institut d'études canadiennes de McGill est de promouvoir une meilleure compréhension du Canada. Pour que cette vision se concrétise, l'IECM s'est donné pour mission de faire progresser la société canadienne, principalement en organisant des conversations sur des sujets qui sont importants pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes, comme ce dont on va parler aujourd'hui. Nous avons également des programmes de formation pour les étudiants et un programme de recherche interdisciplinaire sur le Canada. I would like to begin by acknowledging that McGill University is located on land that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. It is important for us at MISC and at McGill more generally to recognize the significance of the land on which we work, study, and live, and to acknowledge the complex web of relationships of which we are a part. We encourage everyone here today to seek out more spaces for learning and understanding about the history of these territories. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes heureux de collaborer avec le consortium des cégep, collèges et universités d'expression anglaise du Québec à l'organisation de cette table ronde bilingue sur la valeur des universités pour le Québec et le Canada. J'espère que le bilinguisme est assez clair déjà dans mes remarques d'introduction. Et je voudrais maintenant céder la place à Céline Cooper, qui est la directrice générale de ce consortium, qui va vous parler un peu de cette organisation avant de présenter notre fantastique modératrice. Céline, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. My name is Celine Cooper, and I am the Managing Director of the Consortium of English Language CEGEPs, Colleges, and Universities of Quebec. I'd like to begin by extending a big thank you to Daniel Bélan and the whole team at MISC for a really wonderful collaboration. And I have to say that I'm particularly pleased that this event is happening in Montreal at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, which has long been an important site for these kinds of big national conversations. Le Consortium des cégeps, collèges et universités d'expression anglaise du Québec est une association novatrice de 9 établissements postsecondaires qui se sont réunis en 2019 au plus haut niveau de leadership avec une mission d'explorer ce que nous pouvons faire ensemble pour améliorer la rétention, l'emploi et la réussite des étudiantes et des diplômés de nos établissements ici même au Québec. Bishops, Concordia, and McGill Universities are 3 of the consortium's member institutions. Our other member institutions are Champlain Regional College, Dawson, Heritage, John Abbott, Marianopolis, and Vanier Colleges. The consortium is grateful to receive provincial funding provided by the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. So I'd like to start us off by introducing today's moderator, Francine Pelletier, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and journalist in residence at Concordia University. She has written and directed 12 documentary films and published 3 books. Her latest, Au Québec, c'est comme ça qu'on vit, explores the evolution of Quebec nationalism over the last few decades. We're delighted to have you in the role of moderator today, Francine. Et avec ça, je vous passe la parole.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Je suis ravie d'être ici, vraiment. Je suis très, très heureuse d'animer ce débat. Merci au consortium et aux études canadiennes de McGill de l'invitation. À mon tour de vous faire les présentations de nos distingués panélistes. Et je commence avec l'homme à ma gauche, que je connais. Graham Carr is the President and Vice Chancellor of Concordia University. Graham's previous leadership positions at Concordia include Provost and Vice President, Academic Affairs, Vice President, Research and Graduate Studies, and Dean of Graduate Studies. I'm keeping the introductions short because there's a lot to discuss. Ensuite, M. Sébastien Lebel-Grenier est principal et vice-chancelier de l'Université Bishop. Avant sa nomination à l'Université Bishop, Sébastien était professeur à la faculté de droit de l'Université Sherbrooke, également doyen de la faculté de 2011 à 2018, excusez-moi. Ensuite, M. Deep Seni is president and vice chancellor at McGill University. He most recently served as president of Dalhousie University in Canada, and prior to that was vice chancellor and president of the University of Canberra in Australia. Martine Saint-Victor est stratège en communication. Elle a fondé et dirigé Milagro Atelier de relations publiques pendant plus de 15 ans. Elle est maintenant la directrice générale du bureau montréalais d'Edelman, une des plus grandes boîtes de communication au monde. Et j'ai appris dans les toilettes à l'instant. Il faut aller aux toilettes. Elle est columniste à la Gazette et à la Presse et commentatrice à Radio-Canada. Et finalement, Val Walker is the Chief Executive Officer at Business and Higher Education Roundtable. Business and Higher Education Roundtable is a non-partisan, non-for-profit organization that brings together some of Canada's largest companies and leading post-secondary institutions. Just un mot de précision avant de commencer. C'est évidemment une séance bilingue. Nous sommes à Montréal. Tout se passe en anglais et en français presque simultanément. Tout le monde a le choix de parler dans la langue de son choix, évidemment. Je voudrais commencer donc cette table ronde en posant une question à chacun de nos panélistes. Et d'ailleurs, je voudrais préciser que de façon générale, étant donné que c'est un vaste sujet, n'est-ce pas, la valeur des universités, de garder les réponses les plus courtes possibles. Particulièrement pour cette première question, je demande à chaque personne de parler 1 ou 2 minutes. Et voici ma question. The value of Canadian universities in Canada and Quebec is the question we're debating today. I think if you asked anyone on the street what the value of universities is, they would say, of course, higher education, and what is known more and more, the possibility of getting ahead. So my question is, what is it that most people don't see about the role of university? What is it that we're missing? Mr. Carr.
Merci Francine et merci Daniel et Céline pour l'invitation d'être ici. C'est toujours un plaisir pour moi d'être avec mes collègues et vous autres. So I think, what is it people don't see about universities? Well, so much of what we focus on is the student experience and teaching and learning, that maybe what people don't realize is the important research contributions that universities make to helping transform society. Was that short enough?
That's wow. Yes,
J'ai bien entendu.
C'est digne de CNN. C'est digne de CNN. Monsieur Lebel-Grenier.
Merci pour l'invitation. Merci aux gens qui sont venus ici aujourd'hui. It's a great pleasure to see you. I think it's important. We're going to be addressing important issues. So the very short answer, that's going to be a hard act to follow. I think there's 2 aspects. Really, the first aspect is for individuals. We're really there to accompany students in their growth and really accompanying individuals to become better versions of themselves. And that doesn't, it's not strictly utilitarian. I think we've got to have a much more open vision of what universities do for people. And I'd like to highlight also a second aspect, which is communities, the role we play for communities. I think universities are a place where we instill through lived experiences values that are essential for our cohabitation and growth as societies. And, you know, with respect to bishops, if I can say, we also play a very special role for our community and the vitality of the Anglophone communities in the Eastern Townships and for Quebec's region. So there's a much greater role than strictly utilitarian.
Merci, Monsieur Seni.
Merci beaucoup, Francine, et bon après-midi à tout le monde. It's normal that we still see education as the primary role of the universities, but because that's the most visible role that you see 40,000 students walking around on McGill campus, but the reality is that if all you've seen what is visible, then you probably have seen nothing. Universities do a whole slew of things. I fully agree with my 2 colleagues to my right, and let me bring up perhaps a couple more. One of the roles, big roles universities play is to be the town square of our society. This is where discussions happen, and open discussions happens without hesitation. In universities, we don't only allow discussions on difficult subjects to happen. We actually celebrate them. We invite them. We celebrate them. And we engage in those discussions in a manner that is perhaps the most civilized anywhere in the society. So that's one point I would like to make. The second one is, and I speak from every university's perspective, but probably even more so from McGill's perspective, we are global connectors of where we are with the rest of the world. McGill University, for example, we have our alumni in almost every country in the world, in 187 countries, 300,000 of them who have studied here and have gone around the world and are making amazing difference to the world. And they go from Montreal and Quebec to the world, and they bring back the world to Montreal and Quebec. And that is another critical role of universities that is often not appreciated.
Thank you.
Merci Francine. Bonjour à tous. Francine runs a tight ship, so I will keep it short. I think the most undervalued part of education is the non-academic education that we get in universities. Town Square, I agree, that's true. But I also think it's one of the rare places today when we think about how much there's polarization in society. It's one of the rare places today where it's okay to change your mind and where you're expected to change your mind at some point during your university journey. So that is not only underestimated, but undervalued.
We really are keeping a tight ship here.
I'm afraid of Francine. So.
I don't know Francine yet, but I'm afraid now too. Hi everyone, I'm Val. I run the Business and Higher Education Roundtable. We sit in Ottawa, but we have members including McGill and Concordia all across the country, universities, colleges, polytechnics, and employers. And so I think the lens that I bring to this question and hopefully to this conversation today, and I'm so pleased to be here, is one that zooms out a little bit. And so when we ask our members about that question, it's all of those things. It's also to get students jobs at the end, right? It's in order to convey ideas and knowledge and to teach people how to learn so that they can succeed and thrive after their education is completed, or until, we should say, they need to upskill or get some more education in this lifelong learning pursuit that we have these days. And so it ties in very well with the rest, but I think it's an important one to state that most students go to university so that they can start a career afterwards.
Thank you. So maybe we should start with that. Student jobs, that's the obvious. The economic contribution of universities is often alluded to. At the same time, can someone at this table put a figure to that? Like, we talk about the financial importance, but how much is Concordia worth to the Quebec economy or Canadian economy?
Well, there's a tangible and an intangible answer to that, Francine. So in 2022, the Chambre de commerce de Montréal Métropolitain did a study with Université de Montréal, with McGill, and with Concordia about the economic impact of the university sector on the city of Montreal. And the result of that was that the universities as an ensemble contributed $22 billion in 2019-20 to the GDP of the Greater Montreal area. So there's your hardcore number. How is that measured? That's measured by the value added that comes from training people to be able to perform at a higher level than they would have been able to contribute to society without university education. It comes from the research contributions that universities make to the city through partnerships with other enterprises, small, medium enterprises, large companies, not-for-profits, etc. It comes from the direct investments that large universities like McGill with 40,000 students, or Concordia with 50,000 students, or Université de Montréal with even more students make financially in terms of the purchasing power of the universities. And it comes from the contributions that our students make as tenants in the city, as people who buy food, who use services, etc., and make financial contributions. So that's just on the dollars and cents side. I think the intangible asset that universities provide provide, and this is why it's such a great richesse for Montreal, is the talent that universities are able to attract to their communities, able to attract to their cities. And the reality that, yes, many of those graduates, as McGill indicated, as Deep indicated, will travel around the world and become ambassadors for Montreal and ambassadors elsewhere, but many stay here. There are 180,000 alumni, Concordia alumni, living in the Greater Montreal area, working in the Greater Montreal area, contributing as leaders in all manner of society, in finance sector, in the games sector, in the arts and design sector. So all of those contributions are more difficult to measure, but they're intangible, but they have real consequences in terms of helping to define the society in which we all live and contribute leadership qualities to that society as well.
Thank you. Monsieur Lebel-Grenet.
Yeah, well, I don't want to repeat, but perhaps I can give you another view of the impact that a university such as Bishop's will have on on the Eastern Townships and on Sherbrooke. So the direct and induced spending coming from Bishop's accounts for over 30 million, over 26 of which is in basically the Lennoxville borough and Sherbrooke, so which is huge. We had a study made on the impact of our out-of-province students. We didn't do the impact analysis for all students, but this is pretty representative. Out-of-province students, including international, account for a bit under 45% of our students, and their direct spending in Quebec is over 21 million. The direct spending in the Lennoxville borough and Sherbrooke is over 18 million. So, and I'm not talking about all the other indirect and induced and the benefits that come out of that. But just to highlight that if you look only at these two figures, and if you factor in the Quebec students, you're talking over $80 million are invested locally, and that really is determinative of the quality of life in Lennoxville borough. But it also has a very structural effect because Bishop's is the biggest Anglophone employer in the region, and it's certainly a focal point for the Anglophone community. So imagine the vitality, how this affects the vitality of a community, and I'm sure we'll have opportunity to discuss it further on in our talk. A community that is not doing that well. You know, if you look at socio-economic indicators, Quebec's Anglophones in the regions are not doing that well, and they need institutions, and they need to be defended, and they need to have opportunities. And when we attack institutions, that is what we are attacking. So I'll leave it at that for now, but extremely significant impact.
Mm-hmm. Merci. Mr. Saini.
Let me, so I totally agree with the points that my colleagues have made, and let me take it in a different direction. So we often talk about the impact of a university in its own milieu where we are residing, and that is, of course, if I start talking about McGill's impact here, I would be stating the obvious. But let me state something that is less than obvious, and that is impact of universities around the world. The people who come, I spoke about the ambassadors who go around the world. Let's talk about them. John Humphreys, a professor of law working at McGill in 1940s and 50s, writes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the most cited legal document in human history that has defined human rights on this earth all across the world, even though at times it appears that in our own milieu we are not particularly respectful of that particular document. The global impact of that is incredible. Let me come to some financial impacts. A kid comes to McGill as a refugee from Europe in 1950s, comes to actually Montreal, doesn't know French, doesn't know English, gets some help from the local community, ends up at McGill, does an engineering degree, goes on to co-found Intel. Anybody ever heard of Intel? Right. All right, and sitting in California, he has given millions of dollars, if my memory serves, over $25 million already to fund scholarships in Quebec for kids to be able to do the same thing. Fast forward, and I'll stop there. I could give about 200 examples of this nature. A kid comes, escapes the civil war in Lebanon, and in the 90s here, early 90s, does an engineering degree here in biomedical engineering, goes on to study at MIT, and a few years later co-founds Moderna. and we end up in a pandemic. The rest, as they say, is history. Well, the history didn't end there. Moderna is back in Montreal. $180 million investment here in Laval to set up a manufacturing plant, and working very, very closely with McGill, with Sherbrooke, and other universities to turn Montreal into a global center of mRNA-based therapies, both vaccines and cure for diseases. The cutting edge of bespoke medicine today, and which will go on to save millions and millions of more lives in the future. I'll stop there.
Interesting. Martine.
Oh, I'm reminded at, and I know I'm speaking with the right crowd with this reference, when former Harvard president Claudine Gay resigned. I don't know if you remember her op-ed in the New York Times. And she used the word corporation to speak of Harvard. When I read it, I said, could it be that it's a no one noticed and it went through anyways? But it was on purpose. Because when we speak of the value of universities, they are corporations. And so what does that mean? That means that they fiscally speaking, they have an importance in the cities where they are. And all you have to look at, you're talking about the impact on the world. Well, have you ever been to a city where there are no universities? That's like a missing limb. And so these days we're talking about the Just for Laughs festival, not doing its festival this summer. And it's a shock. Why? Because it's part of who we are, and it gives back. We get from it, but it gives back. It's the same thing with universities. So that's why we have to protect them. I'm not going to get into politics now, but I will, actually, a little bit.
You have already.
So the attack right now on universities, we have to be outraged for many reasons, but we have to be outraged because they're coming after one of our limbs. So we have to pay attention to that. And we do, obviously, but I think that's what it means to have an institution of education in our cities.
Merci. Val Walker.
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow, all of those things. I'm going to give you a couple stats from a different perspective to answer the question about the economic impact of universities here in Quebec. So if you look at outcome data from StatsCan, people with university degrees overwhelmingly have jobs that pay more than people without university degrees. They then go on to pay more taxes, right? There is a full loop that you go through in terms of contributing back, not just into the economy, that folks who have higher paying jobs are more likely to invest and give back in that community, but also to the public purse through income tax. I did a scan of what the top skills needs are, labor shortages right now. Sorry, the data are from 2022, so not right now today, in Quebec, and all of them, I'll just list a couple: health professionals, computer science, mental health and psychology, early childhood education, data science, information management. The employers in this province, those are the occupations right now that are most in demand, and nearly all, if not all of those occupations require a university degree, if not more than a single university degree, in order to fulfill those roles and then contribute to the companies who need those people doing those jobs to then also give back to the local economy. And the last thing I'll say, which is a little bit of a divergence, but I hope you'll appreciate this, that when times are tougher, when economic times are tougher and we go into recession, there is always, of course, a boom bust. Those with university credentials are the ones who are able to better weather those ups and downs. They are more likely to be able to find employment in those times where higher unemployment exists. And so for those reasons, all of those, again, looking at the perspective of employment and jobs for folks coming out of the universities, there's a huge economic impact in addition to what my colleagues up here have talked about as well.
So once again, Val, you sort of opened the door to my next subject. I had sort of broken down the discussion, the major aspects of universities' values in economic, social, cultural, and political. So you mentioned, socially and culturally. What does it mean, for example, for a city like Montreal to have 4 universities in the same city. That's a very rare occurrence, I think. Perhaps you could address the question of la question de l'impact social et culturel des universités dans une ville comme Montréal.
Merci Francine. Alors, évidemment, j'ai une biais, mais je pense que le fait que Montréal est une vraie ville universitaire se distingue par rapport à la grande majorité des villes en Amérique du Nord. Et c'est une richesse qui n'est pas arrivée par hasard. C'est grâce à plus de 20 ans de travail qui a été fait par les politiciens, les gens d'affaires, les gens qui viennent du milieu d'études supérieures pour bâtir Montréal comme une ville universitaire exemplaire à l'échelle planétaire. Et tout le monde qui a travaillé sur ce bon défi, ils ont réussi. Montreal is, every year, the most desirable university city in North America in which to be a student. And every year, it is one of the top 10 university cities in the world. But it is also a magnet for hundreds of thousands of students. I believe the latest numbers I saw were in the area of 175,000 university students in the city of Montreal. That's a huge number. It represents something like 4% of the population of the city of Montreal. But those students are also coming from everywhere. Ils viennent de partout au travers du Québec. Ils viennent du Beauce, ils viennent d'Abitibi-Témiscamingue, ils viennent de l'Est de Montréal, de l'Ouest de Montréal. Mais ils viennent aussi de tout le Canada, de toute l'Amérique du Nord. Et comme Deep a déjà évoqué, ils viennent de tous les coins du monde. At Concordia, we have students registered today from more than 150 different countries. One of the incredible riches that affords for the student experience, but also I feel for the experience of the city of Montreal, is the diversity that is available, that is baked into who we are as a city, baked into who we are as a university. And I think it was Martin who said earlier on, one of the great opportunities of going to university is to be put in a position where it's okay to change your mind. You have the opportunity to change your mind when you actually encounter people who are different from you, who come from different cultures, who come from different backgrounds, who speak different languages, who have different points of view, who have different values, and whose presence challenges you to think differently about yourself. And I also believe that diversity is an incredible spark for innovation. You know, there was a sociologist a number of years ago named Scott Page who did a study, and the outcome of the study was essentially to say if you had a problem that you wanted to solve, and you put 10 brilliant people together, and they came from the same background and the same educational formation, etc., they would get you an answer. But if you put another 10 people together from very different backgrounds, the work that they had to do to communicate with each other, to establish a baseline for going further, will allow them to go further forward in their innovation. And I think that is a huge asset for Montreal, the diversity that this university community in the city has to offer.
Here, here. Monsieur Lebel-Grenier, vous avez parlé de la communauté anglophone et qu'elle allait assez mal, merci, dans les cantons de l'Est. Peut-être que vous pourriez parler davantage de ça.
Oui, dans les régions. Bien, je ne vais pas vous parler de Montréal, bien entendu. Ouais. J'ai des collègues qui sont pas mal mieux placés pour vous en parler. Mais je peux vous parler de Sherbrooke. Qu'est-ce que ça représente à Sherbrooke? Sherbrooke, qui est une ville aussi qui bénéficie de deux institutions universitaires, l'Université de Sherbrooke et l'Université Bishop. Et c'est une ville où on peut étudier du préscolaire au doctorat dans les deux langues. Ce qui est quand même une richesse extraordinaire. C'est quand même une ville qui demeure relativement petite, un peu plus que 200 000 personnes de population dans la région. Donc, vous pouvez imaginer l'impact que ça peut avoir sur cette région-là. Ça amène aussi un autre élément qui est peut-être moins connu, c'est que l'Université Bishops, la composition du corps étudiant est très diversifiée. D'ailleurs, c'est un des éléments qu'on a vraiment mis de l'avant l'automne dernier dans les enjeux auxquels on a dû faire face. On a un peu moins de 30% des étudiants qui viennent de partout au Canada. donc des étudiants à l'extérieur du Québec. Donc, ils viennent vraiment de toutes les régions du Canada. Et on a également près de 15% des étudiants qui proviennent de partout dans le monde. Donc, il y a une très, très grande diversité qui se réunit sur le campus. Et d'ailleurs, très publiquement, on l'avait mis de l'avant cet automne dans le cadre de la crise qu'on a vécue. Ça fait partie de l'identité de Sherbrooke et c'est une identité qui est non seulement accueillie, mais qui est vraiment valorisée, appropriée par l'ensemble de la communauté des cantons de l'Est. Lorsqu'il a fallu se battre contre les mesures qui étaient annoncées, c'est l'ensemble de la communauté des cantons de l'Est, principalement les francophones de la région des cantons de l'Est, environ 80%, tous les leaders qui sont venus sur le campus pour démontrer non seulement qu'ils soutenaient l'université, mais que l'université faisait partie du tissu social dans notre région. Donc, c'est une démonstration que les universités, ce n'est pas une question de langue. On est au service du Québec, on est au service de notre communauté et on fait une différence à cette communauté-là et on enrichit la communauté par la diversité qu'on y amène. Ça ne pourrait pas avoir lieu s'il n'y avait pas d'université, s'il n'y avait pas d'université Bishop, s'il n'y avait pas d'université de Sherbrooke dans la région de Sherbrooke.
Et comment, en fait, je vais garder ces questions pour plus tard. Mr. Seni, I liked what you mentioned about the town hall, the discussions happening on the town squares. That is a social and cultural phenomena type. Perhaps you could expand on that.
I can. Yeah, let me go. So let me go to the university being a place of evidence. So we live in times where more and more decisions are being made on the basis of opinions rather than on the basis of considered evidence and data. So what does the university do? University, through our research and scholarship, one of the key things we do is to generate a lot of information based on real hardcore data, based on peer-reviewed research, based on being challenged constantly to seek the truth and ask questions. So we are the custodians in the society of that data and that evidence on which decisions should be made, decisions can be made, but increasingly those decisions are being made by ignoring the evidence that is produced by the universities. And now within the town square, that discussion continues to happen in a robust manner. But outside that town square, the citizens are sadly engaging less and less with that evidence, and particularly the governments, and I'm not speaking about just government in Quebec, but governments across the board. It's happening across Canada, it's happening south of the border in the United States, it's happening around the world, that governments are making decisions less and less based on evidence and more based on opinions that are divorced from the evidence and that are often based on preconceived biases. That is a key aspect of the role of the town square that universities continue to play, but it would behoove the society and it would be in the long-term interests of the society to insist on participation in that town square to mine that data, mine that evidence before making decisions. Because we have to make decisions for the future of mankind. The decisions that we are making today are not frivolous decisions. They are decisions that would, in many cases, actually determine the survival of our species.
We're moving in a minute to the political aspects, but perhaps you could just specify, you could answer the question, why do you think the governments more and more are moving away from evidence-based information?
I think it's in the nature of the human beings. That's where I go. I think we have a global trend towards populism, and populism by definition does not like evidence. I think that's what's happening.
Thank you. Martine, in terms of the social and cultural impact of universities, well, you mentioned you can change your mind. Perhaps you'd like to expand on that?
You promised that we would get to politics in 1 minute, so I'm going to actually get to it. Je pense qu'on ne peut absolument pas oublier que les universités sont les bassins des révolutions. Et vous savez, on a célébré les succès de l'ancien Premier ministre Brian Mulroney à sa mort la semaine dernière. And one of his accomplishments that kept coming up is how he stood against apartheid. And it was very brave when he did it, but that's politics. It's not politicians who resisted apartheid first. It was businesses. And if you remember Sun City, the Hotel Sun City, where artists boycotted it, and that's when the business pressure started. Well, the business pressure also came from Coca-Cola, who said, you know, we're not going to sell, we're not going to produce anymore in South Africa. And the reason that happened is because on various university campuses, students said, we're not going to buy Coca-Cola anymore. We're not going to have Coca-Cola machines anymore. And that had a trickle-down effect. So revolutions start in universities. And I can tell you, because I'm the oldest person in my office in Montreal. I'm a little bit of a dinosaur there, but a lot of my colleagues are just out of university, and the convictions that they have, I don't have to agree with them, but they believe in something. And I find that sometimes the older we get, the more watered down what we believe in is. And so, you know, the social impact of university is also that, is, you know, keeping us accountable, the decision makers, the leaders, and I think that is a very, very important role.
Merci. Val?
Again, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to answering this question in terms of the social and cultural impact by telling a story to start with. So I'm a graduate of McGill. I have a PhD in the Faculty of Medicine from the Physiology Department. My first job out of school was in the federal public service. I was one of those bureaucrats trying to make evidence-based decisions. When I got to the federal government in Health Canada, we were making evidence-based decisions. I was on the policy side of things, which was weird because I was actually a scientist. But during my brief stint as a bureaucrat, it turns out I'm not a great bureaucrat, the language officially changed, and it did happen to occur in alignment with a change in government from red team to blue team, that we started to use the term evidence-informed decision making, and it's one word, but it was a big shock to someone who based every decision in life on data and positive controls and negative controls for the positive controls, so that we could be very clear. Now, I worked on cells in a dish, and I know that's not how society works, but it was a shock. So that's a story to say. I do think, this is where we're going to respectfully disagree and challenge. My thinking, having lived through it really briefly, is that increasingly now our governments are populist governments, right? They're not technocratic in the way maybe of the past. And so you make decisions and policies and laws and procedures and regulations that you want to be popular to the masses. The masses aren't people with university degrees. They're not. Canada talks about being the most educated country in the world when you look at OECD stats with the right things. If you look at people, and I did, in Canada and in Quebec, in the 2021 census, who have a bachelor's degree or higher, it's about 30%. So, and I'm gonna, not to put too fine a point on this, but if I were to ask you to raise your hands, how many people in this room have at least a bachelor's degree, my guess is that more than 30% of the room is going to put their hand up. And so part of us debating the role of the social impact we're having and the cultural impact we're having at universities needs to happen with the 70%, with the other, everyone in the town hall in a way that can actually resonate, or because if it's not the majority and the populist governments make decisions based on what the majority want, then I don't know, So that's.
So are you saying that we're still, we the universities are still an ivory tower? Are you saying that we are not reaching out enough?
I would be hesitant to make such a blanket statement, especially with folks up here in the room, but I think there's,
We're going to go around.
I think there's definitely more the universities can do. I've seen progress, but I think we need to do a lot more. It's not to, like, it's partly why my organization exists, and it's partly why there's a continued need to bring together people from, man, I'll just tell you, when we first started the Business Higher Education Roundtable, it was 2016, we couldn't even get the universities and college folks to play all that nice together, right? Yet alone the institutions, higher education institutions, and the employers. So, like, it was a really fun challenge, and I used PhD after my name when I was talking to some of the university folks, and I definitely just said my name's Val when I was talking to some of the employers, but sitting in the spaces in between was fascinating to figure out a way to talk together and bring people together from across a really wide spectrum of society. And so, yes, there's more universities can do in that regard.
Mr. Saini, yes?
Well, I'm going to make it easier for you. I know it's hard for you to say it, but you said it actually quite well, but I would agree 100% with you. I think universities do a great deal for our society. We are the pillars of our society in many ways, but we don't do a good job of communicating that to that 70% that you spoke about, and particularly to the 70% that live away from, geographically away from universities. And a lot of the people sitting here are connected with the universities, and I'll say that that's our challenge. I think going forward, that's not just challenge for survival of universities. I think that is a challenge that we must embrace for the survival of our democratic societies. If the universities don't step up and tell their story in an effective, simplified way that people who don't have university degrees can understand, we are actually putting our own democratic societies in peril. And that's a responsibility we must embrace.
Thank you. Yes, I think we should go around because this is very interesting. I mean, we wouldn't be here today if somehow the message was getting properly through that, about the value of universities. Obviously, people don't quite see what universities are, all of what universities are up to, and what they should be doing. So, Martine. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to put it in context a little bit, at Edelman we have a trust barometer. We've had it for almost 25 years, where we measure the trust that citizens have in 4 institutions: businesses, NGOs, media, and governments. The lowest trust, the people who we trust the less are politicians. The people we trust the most, and that reassures me, are researchers and scientists. But what is it that the trust barometer, just out a week ago today, reveals in Canada? That people want to hear more from scientists and researchers, but they want them to be able to break it down better. Now, to agree with what you said, in parallel to that, when you look at who do you want to hear news from, the number one group is, quote unquote, someone like me. Not me, Martine, but someone like me, meaning that it's not the anchor type anymore that gets the most trust. And so this is why when you see news organizations break down the news on TikTok, it's not the anchor in a suit and tie. It's the person that's more on the ground doing. These are the people that we trust the most with information. So why do I use this example? Because universities have to do a better job of getting the news to the people the way they consume the news. So get on TikTok, hurry up, because I think Congress is about to ban it. And so that exercise has to be done. So universities have to do cet examen de conscience, c'est-à-dire take a better pulse. How do people get their news? How do people want to hear from us? And many universities do that very well. Some of them are a little bit réticents because they're like, we're not going to get on TikTok. Well, you need to. If you want to get your news out there, it doesn't diminish the quality of the content. It's just the form of the content that changes.
Monsieur Labelle-Grenier, do you think that universities are still too stuck up, or too far from the madding crowd?
Well, it's interesting. We got strict directives not to use TikTok as universities, but that's another story. Now that being said, I think we're squarely into politics now.
Yes, thank God.
So the link between populism and communications. And what I'd like to say is that clearly we have not been doing a good job at communicating what we are doing as universities, but also our impact on Quebec society. And j'ai dit tout à l'heure que nous, puis je crois que mes collègues sont du même avis, nous nous considérons non pas comme des universités dites anglophones, mais des universités au service de la population québécoise et canadienne et internationale, mais premièrement québécoise. Et les universités anglophones, parce qu'on nous a catégorisés d'universités anglophones dans la loi 96, c'est une étiquette qui nous a été apposée. Mais les universités anglophones font depuis très longtemps, de façon assez agressive, mettent en place toutes sortes de mesures pour donner des opportunités d'apprendre le français à nos étudiants, particulièrement aux étudiants qui viennent de l'extérieur du Québec. Nous mettons en place toutes sortes de mesures pour qu'ils puissent intégrer la société québécoise, en apprendre plus pour pouvoir être intéressés à demeurer ici et ensuite réussir l'intégration s'ils demeurent ici. Mais ces éléments-là sont généralement très méconnus et le gouvernement a eu quand même assez peu de résistance, mis à part de notre part, lorsqu'il a affirmé que les universités anglophones sont un facteur de déperdition du français, d'anglicisation de la société, qui menace le tissu social du Québec. Et ça, c'est important. Je crois que c'est un échec de notre part. On n'a pas réussi à communiquer de façon efficace ce qu'on fait et aussi la volonté qu'on a. On est dans une époque où, peut-être qu'il y a 50 ans, les universités de langue anglaise, c'était autre chose qui se passait, étaient plus détachées de la société québécoise. Mais je crois que si on regarde Concordia, McGill, Bishop, nous sommes des universités qui sont intégrées dans le tissu de la société québécoise, qui reconnaissent l'importance de défendre le français, de donner des opportunités à nos étudiants d'apprendre le français, mais qui ont le droit de continuer d'exister aussi comme des universités qui enseignent principalement en anglais. Donc, il n'y a pas une opposition tout à fait faite. Et ça, c'est un échec de communication. Et moi, c'est la leçon principale que j'ai retenue de la crise qu'on a vécue.
Bon, alors, plongeons carrément dans la crise, puisqu'elle nous appelle. Monsieur Carr, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord que les Concordia, comme les autres universités dites anglophones, ont mal communiqué qui ils étaient et ce qu'ils faisaient?
C'est certainement le cas. Je pense que les universités n'étaient pas toujours les meilleurs vendeurs de leur salade et peut-être on a besoin d'aide de nos partenaires. J'ai parlé auparavant de l'importance de l'université dans les communautés, l'importance des collaborations avec les entreprises, etc. Quelque chose qu'on n'a pas réussi à faire, c'est de convaincre nos partenaires d'aller de l'avant pour vendre l'importance des établissements universitaire. And I think that's been a big loss for us. It's one thing for universities to champion what they do. It's much more powerful if other sectors of society are championing what we do. And I don't think we've been as diligent about encouraging that as we should. I will say that par rapport aux crises des politiques du gouvernement du Québec vis-à-vis les établissements anglophones, le Chambre de commerce de Montréal métropolitain, le Conseil de patronat était de l'avant en appuyant notre cause. C'était très, très, très apprécié. Mais on a besoin de ça dans les temps où il ne se trouve pas une crise aussi. It's got to be something that becomes a reflex. I think part of the explanation for that is that I think in universities we place a lot of emphasis on expertise and knowledge, and we forget that universities don't have a monopoly on expertise. That was unexpected. But welcome. And again, I get back to the industry partnerships. You put students out working in co-op stage in milieu de travail, in entreprise, in OBNL. They learn things. They learn different things. You discover that there is extraordinary knowledge and expertise outside the walls of the university, and we have to make those relations more bilateral. We have to recognize the fact that we don't have a lock on knowledge in the ivory tower. There is one other thing, though, that I would say about elitism, and universities. And that is that I think we overlook the fact that universities, certainly in North America, have changed a lot over the course of the last 30 or 40 years. You know, Concordia is a university whose history was based on accessibility in many respects, and for whom accessibility and excellence were not antonyms. And I think if we look at what has happened, there are now 18 universities in Quebec. Le réseau de l'Université du Québec, c'était fondé pour donner la possibilité des gens à Rimouski, à Chicoutimi, à Abitibi-Témiscamingue d'avoir accès à une formation universitaire. Et on voit ça partout au travers du Canada. Maintenant, il y a quoi, 96, 97 universités dans toutes les régions du Canada. Et ça, c'est important aussi parce que c'est une façon par laquelle les universités sont plus égalitaires, sont plus démocratiques, parce que les gens ont un accès plus facile. And I think we can't overlook that that's one of the very important changes that has happened in the higher education sector in this province and in this country over the last 40 years or so.
J'aimerais revenir sur quelque chose que vous avez dit, M. Lebel-Grenier. Vous dites que vous ne vous considérez pas comme une université anglophone et pourtant, une des raisons de la crise aujourd'hui, c'est qu'il y a cette perception qui perdure des deux solitudes, que les universités anglophones, c'est les fat cats, et puis les universités francophones, ce sont les pauvres qui en arrachent toujours. Êtes-vous d'accord? Est-ce qu'il y a une différence entre les universités anglophones et francophones au Québec?
Well, let me switch to English to just switch it up now. So is there a difference? You know, yes and no, of course, because, but I think there's a lot more difference between individual universities in Quebec. So you've got comprehensive universities, you've got universities that are monodisciplinary, you've got small universities, you've got regional universities, you've got large universities. You have mainly English language universities and mainly French language universities. So I think we can't be making too much of the difference between universities. I think there's many criteria to look at, and language is one of those. Now, as regards the tradition that the English language community universities are coming from, you know, there's a long-standing historic tradition certainly for McGill and Bishops, but also Concordia. Concordia is coming out of a long history as well of universities that have been there and have been an important part of community. Now, I think the important part is we've got to look at what our universities are today. And these universities, as Graham was saying, and as other panelists were saying, are universities that are seeking to be accessible and to be at the service of their communities. So my general answer would be no. Now, that being said, with respect to Bishops, I think for our university, there are a few distinct components because of the specific role we play specifically with the Anglophone communities of the Eastern Townships. Now, if Bishops wasn't there, the vitality of the Anglophone communities in the Eastern Townships would be at great threat. Bishops is really a focal point for artistic community activities. Just athletics seems trivial. It's not. It's something that brings community together, and people come to campus as a meeting place, be they graduates of Bishops or not. This is a place where community comes together. So that's really, really significant. It's a special role. As regards life on campus, whereby we're a predominantly English language university in our teaching, if you go around campus, you hear French, you hear other languages all the time. So it's a place of diversity, and we certainly have roughly 1/3 of our students who are francophones who come to campus because Bishops, and as other English language universities, is an incredibly rich pathway, a safe place to gain greater fluency in English and open themselves up to the world. So it's an important social role that's not limited or defined by the primary language of instruction. And certainly they've happened to choose a francophone to head the university.
Mr. Saini, what would you say to the big two solitudes question, especially since McGill is the big player here,
We have
the
the target
fat cat par
painted on us,
excellence.
yeah. Well, since my colleague switched to English, let me switch to French then in that case. Yeah. Les universités sont des lieux de service à la société, des lieux de service à grande échelle. Les besoins de nos citoyens, les besoins de nos commerces, de nos entreprises, notre société sont diversifiés, très très diversifiés partout au Québec. Et en parallèle, nos 18 ou 19 universités, dépendant de quelle institution compte comme une université, ces 19 institutions sont également diversifiées pour répondre aux besoins diversifiés de notre société, de nos citoyens, de notre commerce, etc., etc. So, to distill it down to one single denominator, the language, is, in my view, it's very, very sterile and counterproductive approach that actually is, in my view, tearing apart our society and our sector that is there to serve the society. We, 18 universities, 19 universities, nous travaillons comme un ensemble, en coordination. We have collaborations in teaching, in research, in service to the society. Together we give a whole lot of things to the society. If you begin to cut it up on the basis of just the language, you're cutting up all those lines that unite us. And there is probably 100 times more that unites us than what divides us on the basis of just language. And to point out, to take what Sébastien said a little bit farther, 3 Anglophone universities, in many ways, McGill and Bishops and Concordia have less in common with one another than, let's say, McGill has in common with Université Montréal. Okay? And then, let's say, Concordia has in common with UQAM. There is a lot of commonality in the purpose, in the nature of the university, and so on. We have more collaborations at McGill with Université Montréal and with University Sherbrooke than with, I would venture to say, probably with Concordia. Right? And it's not because, so this is not the language that's determining it. It's what we are offering to the society and where is the best place to offer it. How can we best offer that? And you said the same thing. You probably have more collaboration with Sherbrooke than with McGill.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a natural thing, right? And so it is very, very important. I mean, laissez-moi adresser la question de la langue. Okay? Moi, j'ai passé 18 années à l'Université de Montréal. J'ai commencé à mon carrière à l'Université de Montréal en 1987. Et à ce moment-là, je n'étais pas capable de parler un mot de français. Okay? J'ai appris mon français à l'Université de Montréal. Et grâce à cette étape que j'ai prise, il y a 3 personnes dans ma famille qui parlent français aujourd'hui. Okay? Moi et mes 2 filles. And when I was at the University of Montreal, it was interesting. You would be amazed. Go and take a walk at University of Montreal, and you will see how many people speak English there. Mm-hmm. Okay? Anglais est parlé couramment à l'Université de Montréal. And this is a good thing, because that has not made Université de Montréal less francophone, just because people are capable of speaking English. At McGill, today, 60% of our students are bilingual. 20% of them have French as their mother tongue. Is that a French factor or not at McGill? It is. In my administration, at least, we switch between English and French in the middle of sentences. Nous fonctionnons en français et en anglais. So I think to reduce it just simply to draw a line, Anglophone university, Francophone university, that is actually yet another expression of ill-informed populism. I think we can do better as a society.
My question to you, Graham, is to follow up on that is there is, though, the perception that, not just, I'm not just talking about the actual government, but on the street, there is the perception in the milieu francophone that English-speaking universities have retained that, speak white mentality where French is not really all that welcome. So how much of that is a false perception?
Je pense que dans notre cas, c'est très faux. Parce qu'au moins presque 25% de nos étudiants sont francophones. La vaste majorité de nos étudiants sont parfaitement bilingues, anglo-franco. On a pas mal de chercheurs, des professeurs qui sont francophones, le personnel comme à McGill qui est francophone. Je pense que oui, nous sommes une université historiquement anglophone, mais comme Sébastien a dit dès le début, nous sommes à le service de la société québécoise. Et peut-être, juste pour retourner à la question précédente, Francine, peut-être ça révèle une autre instance où les universités anglophones n'ont pas fait le meilleur possible pour démontrer notre ouverture à la société québécoise, pour démontrer comment nos établissements sont vraiment intégrés et intégrales pour Montréal, mais pour le Québec aussi. Alors, je pense que on a du travail à faire nous-mêmes pour s'assurer, monsieur, madame, tout le monde, que nous sommes partie de cette société, que nous sommes ouverts. Si je pense à notre école de cinéma, par exemple, qui est la plus grande école de cinéma au travers du Québec, la majorité des étudiants dans cette école sont francophones. Il y a une raison pour ça. C'est parce que Concordia et vous savez, Francine est très intégrée dans la vie culturelle, artistique à Montréal. C'est impossible de penser à des grands artistes, des grands spectacles à Montréal sans penser à des diplômés de Concordia. Mais il y a quelque chose qui n'a pas cliqué avec, si je peux utiliser cette expression, n'a pas cliqué avec la population, surtout à l'extérieur de Montréal. Et ça, c'est une autre réalité pour McGill, pour nous autres. Sébastien, moi, je suis Sherbrookeois. Je connais très bien l'importance de Bishops et la synergie entre Bishops et l'Université de Sherbrooke. Et c'est quelque chose de très spécial dans les cantons de l'Est. Mais à Montréal, oui, nous sommes très bien connus à Montréal. Mais à l'extérieur de Montréal, je pense qu'on a du travail à faire. Et ça, c'est un défi important parce qu'on doit aller de l'avant, on doit dépasser ces questions linguistiques pour s'assurer que l'enseignement supérieur, c'est vraiment une richesse pour le Québec, pour tous les Québécois.
Alors, parlons de l'éléphant dans la pièce. Je vous signale d'ailleurs que je ne vous l'ai pas dit qu'il va y avoir des questions. Vous allez pouvoir poser des questions. À la fin, là, on va arrêter dans 10 minutes, puis on va vous passer la parole. L'éléphant dans la pièce, si on n'est pas parlé de Fat Cats, il y a la question que les universités anglophones, en fait, c'est basé là-dessus que le gouvernement actuel a haussé les tarifs, c'est que vous faites plus d'argent que les universités francophones.
OK, tu parles à un recteur qui préside sur un budget déficitaire de plus de 35 millions de dollars. Concordia n'était jamais une université riche. Jamais, jamais, jamais. Dans toute l'histoire de l'université. Alors ça, c'est faux. Oui, est-ce que c'est vrai que les universités anglophones ont eu accès à un plus grand bassin d'étudiants internationaux? Absolument, c'est vrai. Mais faire un arrimage entre cette réalité puis notre état financier. Moi, je peux vous assurer, nous ne sommes pas une université riche. On n'était jamais une université riche. Et alors, moi, j'ai beaucoup de misère avec cette caricature. Et juste pour retourner à un point que Deep a souligné plus tôt, malheureusement, nous sommes dans un moment historique où les caricatures parfois comptent plus que les faits et les données. Et une des misères que mes collègues et moi ont vécu pendant les 3-4 derniers mois, c'est le développement des politiques non chiffrées, sans données et contrefactuelles. Mais nous sommes rendus là, malheureusement.
Oui, allez-y, mais parce que quand même, le fait d'offrir des cours en anglais a un pouvoir d'attraction que les universités francophones n'ont pas, et par conséquent, vous avez attiré plus d'étudiants de l'extérieur, du Canada et de l'extérieur, et donc, ça fait plus d'argent. Ben, peut-être pas à Sherbrooke, là, mais allez-y.
Oui, ben, justement, je crois qu'on a vraiment besoin de regarder les vraies données, là. Je peux vous le dire, nous, si on regarde Bishops, lorsqu'on compare Bishops aux petites universités au Québec, le manque à gagner de Bishops, c'est d'environ 10 millions de dollars par année. Lorsqu'on compare aux autres petites universités du Québec, sur un budget qui était l'an dernier de 74 millions de dollars. Et donc, de prétendre qu'on est riche, c'est complètement farfelu. En fait, on essaie de faire des miracles avec des sommes, des moyens qui sont inférieurs à peu près toutes les autres universités. Les salaires universitaires à Bishop sont les plus bas au Québec. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on n'a pas d'argent. On pense que les étudiants qui proviennent du reste du Canada sont riches. On peut augmenter les frais de scolarité, les doubler, ça n'aura pas d'impact. La réalité, c'est qu'ils ne sont pas différents des étudiants québécois qui viennent chez nous. La vaste majorité ne sont certainement pas indépendants de fortune et ne viennent pas de familles riches. L'augmentation des frais de scolarité, ça a un impact direct sur l'accès à l'éducation. Donc, de prétendre qu'on est riche, qu'on est cousu d'or et puis que finalement on pourrait se passer de sommes auxquelles on devrait avoir droit en pleine égalité avec n'importe quelle autre université, ben, c'est de vivre dans un univers parallèle. Parce que si c'était le cas, les universités de langue anglaise seraient privées. Ce n'est pas le cas.
Monsieur Sani, oui.
Let me unpack this a
Yes,
little bit
please.
from in real numbers from McGill's perspective. But before I do that, I'll say that, and I'll say it openly to anybody who's listening, that I'll be willing to engage in a public debate with anybody within Quebec on this issue of financing of English versus French universities, because the urban myth that circulates is so completely without foundation that it's not funny. It's worth debating it in public.
Well, perhaps you can.
So
just,
let me unpack it.
Yes.
So there are three types of funding that comes to a university: the operating funds, the research funds, and the donations. So let's look at the operating funds. Each university in Quebec gets the operating funds based on the same formula applied across the board. There are no differences, except that French universities get a special envelope that goes only to French universities. So in reality, when it comes to operating funds, per student basis, they get more funding. French universities get more funding than English universities get. So exact opposite of the percentage.
How much more?
I can't tell you the number, but I can get back to you. So, number two, the funding of a university is dependent on the mixture of students. It's based on what you're teaching. So if you have a medical school, you're going to get more funding per student than if you have, if you're teaching political science or philosophy or whatever else, right? It's just the cost of teaching different things. And universities like McGill, because we have more of those programs that are expensive to teach, we get more money, but that doesn't mean we get more money in comparison with another university that has the same programs. Like McGill University gets no more money for medicine than Sherbrooke does, or Laval does, or University of Montreal does. So there is that urban myth. Now, let me come to research money. Yes, there is no question McGill gets more research money than any other university in Quebec. But that money doesn't come as operating money. That is to support research, and that's competitive research. That's not a handout. That's the researchers that go and get that money through competition on the national level, sometime on the global level. We get tons of money from the United States because we compete for funding in the United States. Now, why do we get more money? Well, let's just look at this way that McGill ranks in the top 30 in the world. And if you are in the top 30 university in the world, that means you have researchers that are among the top 30 in the world. And those people are going to get more funding because they are doing things that are on the global level that require a huge amount of funding. That money, zero amount of that money actually goes to fund the operations of the university. Actually, more research money you get, the poorer you get, because there's money needed to keep the lights on. And you don't, when every time you get $100 to do research, you get zero, well, you get about 22 cents from the federal government to keep the lights on, okay? And the actual cost, and this is not McGill's estimate, this is actually national estimate, that to keep the lights on and keep all the supplies happening and so on, it takes more than 40 cents to every dollar to actually keep those. So every time you get 20 cents instead of 40 cents that you need, you are poorer by 20 cents. And the more money you get for research, the poorer you get. So, and I could go on. People talk about McGill's endowment, and they forget what that endowment is for. Almost none of the endowment is to run the functions of the university. All the endowment is for research. This is where the discoveries over the last 50 years have come from that have gone on to create mRNA vaccines, that have led to the foundation of Moderna. Those things are happening at even smaller universities. Your people are doing remarkable research in environment and sustainability. Concordia is emerging as a global leader. Okay. And that's happening because of the money that's coming for research, not operating money. So that's why I'm saying that I'll be happy, actually, I'll be very, very happy to invite anybody in Quebec to have a public debate with me. We will stand at the corner of St. Catherine Street and McGill Avenue and have that debate.
What about tuition fees? Doesn't that count?
Okay, so let's talk about the tuition fee. The tuition for Quebec students is identical for everybody. The tuition, the way the difference of tuition is, that's what type of international students you get, okay? So when the government deregulated international tuition, they sent tens of millions of dollars to the French universities to recruit more international students. No fault of theirs. What French universities did, they went ahead and recruited those students from France, from Belgium, from Senegal, from Morocco, and so on, Francophone countries. Great thing, it's a great acquisition for Quebec. But the tuition for those students is regulated by the government. They pay the same tuition as Canadian students. Until now, they were paying $9,000, right? So their enrollment went up 71%, huge increase in enrollment, but at a level of tuition which is low. Now, where the problem is that if you're going to charge low tuition, some education is going to cost money, right? Somebody has to fund it. The government did not step up and said, okay, because we are asking you to recruit students that are low fee paying, we're going to give you more money to make up for that. McGill's enrollment after deregulation, international enrollment went down by 10%. Actually went down. There's a myth that McGill increased its international tuition. We went down. But the students who are coming to McGill are coming from China, from US, from India, from Iran, even from France. We're getting a lot of students from France. But they are paying higher tuition fees because they are not subsidized. They're not regulated by the Quebec government. So the result of that is we end up with more money with less students, but not because we did something wrong. It's because the government did not support the French universities in doing what they did. And same thing happens to us when we get French students from France. We get the same level of tuition that UQAM gets or Université of Montréal gets. We teach them. 2,200 French students are studying at McGill as we speak. Second highest number among international students. But we're teaching them at the lower tuition rate because Quebec government is subsidizing. Now we could bring 2,000 more if the government was willing to say, here is $20,000 more for each student because we want you to bring more students from France and teach them. But the way the government is approaching it, we will be equally poor very soon, and they will have a bigger problem than what they're trying to solve now. Complex, but it's the reality.
Very complex. So apart from better messaging, public messaging about the role of universities, is there something to be done about the finance model that's presently, and how different?
All right, so
much time you have?
I'm going to be I'm going to try to be really brief. The problem in Quebec and the problem in many other jurisdictions in Canada is not the complexity of the funding formula, it's the lack of funding. The reality is that universities in Quebec are underfunded by between 1.4 and $2 billion per year compared to universities in the rest of Canada. And those data points come from the respected economist Pierre Fortin on the one hand, or Rémi Quirion, the scientifique en chef du Québec, on the other. And we're seeing something very similar happening in Ontario. If you're looking at a number of universities, including my alma mater, Queen's, which suddenly find themselves in the unprecedented position of being in a significant deficit. And why? It's again because of lack of funding and because of government public policy with respect to manipulation of tuition. So the funding formula is extraordinarily complex, Francine, but if you did want to distill it to one thing, the common denominator is underfunding. And that's chronic underfunding, which has existed year over year over year over year. In the budget that was announced yesterday, the increase for universities is 1%. Inflation is where? And that's 1% this year as just another year in a succession of years of underfunding. I get it. Governments have choices to make. That's their right. That's their right to choose to fund other public policies and other activities. But on the other hand, if you're trying to operate a university and you're operating a university in a public funding context, it's important for people to understand that this is the reality with which we're working. So the only way over the last few years to address that disequilibrium was to grow, was to increase the number of students. And now that's becoming more and more challenging because of the nature of the labor market, because of competition, etc. The growth model is no longer going to be a model for success.
Un petit mot, on me dit qu'il n'y aura pas de questions à la salle parce qu'on n'a pas assez de temps. Alors, si vous me permettez, je vais continuer à poser des questions. Alors, M. Lebel-Grenier, pourquoi le Québec qui se targue d'avoir fait une révolution tranquille basée sur l'éducation, où on est passé de la société, une des plus analphabètes au monde, à une des assez éduquées? En fait, on a construit tout un réseau d'universités. Bon, je passe les détails, vous les connaissez. Comment se fait-il que c'est ce qui nous démarque en ce moment, c'est le sous-financement des universités au Québec?
C'est une bonne question. Peut-être que vous avez une réponse. Écoutez, je ne veux pas être cynique ici, mais au Québec, on a fait certains choix de société, notamment d'avoir des frais de scolarité pour la population locale, qui est la population du Québec, qui sont très bas lorsqu'on les compare aux autres provinces canadiennes. Et on l'a fait de façon délibérée, là, loin de moi l'idée de critiquer ce choix-là, notamment parce qu'on a constaté qu'il y avait un retard dans les taux de diplomation des Québécois qu'il fallait rattraper. One of the interesting conversations that went on last fall is that our provincial governments, one of their main priorities is closing what they call the income gap with Ontario, notably, and the key to doing that is education, for the government, and I think that's a very justifiable social choice. Now, that being said, you're not going to close it by underfunding, continued underfunding, and by putting forth measures that are attacking some of the universities. So to come back to the budget question, What the budget confirmed yesterday was that essentially there's no new money for higher education. And the scope of the reinvestment, because we have been talking reinvestment with the government, is actually a clawback on English language institutions that's going to be redistributed to French language universities. That's not an investment. That's just shifting money around. And there's the introduction this year of a new mechanism for attributing funding to universities. Same thing. That's going to be done only in shifting money around. So we're looking at we're working with the mechanics of a very complicated system for allocating limited resources, but we're just making things more complicated. We're having a negative impact on some institutions and trying to think that that's going to be beneficial for the province. And we're not investing new money. So it seems that either we're trying to shift the problem, or either we're not really being coherent with the stated social objective of making higher education a priority.
Mr. Seni.
Yeah, let me state that the problem in very simple numbers. As Sebastian said, that we have made a choice as a society to keep the tuition quite low here in Quebec, and I would not question that. That's a decision that we made collectively as a society. But let me share the consequences of that, because education costs money and somebody has to pay for it. There are roughly 535,000 university students in Quebec at the moment. And the difference in tuition, average tuition between Quebec and Ontario is roughly 3,000. So you do the numbers, that adds up to a difference of 1.6 roughly billion dollars in revenue from tuition between Ontario and Quebec University. If our universities are in Ontario, we would have $1.6 billion more. So the problem starts because we made a choice to charge low tuition here in Quebec. That is perfectly fine, but somebody has to come up with that $1.6 billion to keep the education funded. And if it's not coming from the government, where else is going to come from? We only have two choices. Either we raise tuition or government steps up and funds the universities. And so it's a problem created by us collectively. Now we try to solve it by stealing a little bit of money from 3 English universities. It's actually a drop in the bucket, right? According to government's own numbers, on a really good day, they may get $110 million. That is not even going to start solving the problem. It will create massive problems for English universities, but solve no problem for French universities. So that's the problem.
Mais Francine, je pense que le point que Deep amène avec ce manque à gagner de 1,6 milliard de dollars, il y a presque une question philosophique, c'est-à-dire que lorsque vous avez posé comme première question quelle était la valeur insoupçonnée de l'éducation, il y a un sens de fierté quand même. C'est-à-dire que quand on est à Montréal, on a une fierté de savoir qu'il y a 4 universités. Et l'autre fierté, c'est un peu la même fierté qu'on a en tant que Québécois lorsqu'on parle de nos soins de santé. Oui, on doit les améliorer, mais on y a accès. Alors, l'accessibilité, mes copanélistes en ont parlé, c'est extrêmement important, il faut être fier de ça. Et ce que Tuition Gate fait, c'est d'attaquer cette accessibilité-là. Donc oui, il y a un manque à gagner, puis il faut investir. Et j'ose dire que l'éducation, ça fait longtemps que c'est plus une priorité pour nous. On parle d'université, mais parlons d'écoles primaires. Les écoles primaires sont en train de tomber brique par brique. Donc, je pense que la question philosophique, c'est est-ce que l'éducation est encore vraiment une priorité au Québec? Et Deep, lorsque vous donniez l'exemple du campus de l'Université de Montréal où on parle anglais, c'est une réalité dans les écoles primaires, les écoles secondaires, quoi qu'en disent les chroniques dans Le Devoir. Ça se fait partout parce que c'est une réalité montréalaise. Mais je pense que vraiment collectivement, on doit se poser la question, est-ce que l'éducation est encore une priorité ici? Ça, c'est la première question. Et la deuxième question, c'est est-ce qu'on veut que les étudiants soient endettés comme ils le sont aux États-Unis? Non, de la même manière qu'on ne veut pas que les gens ici aient à hypothéquer leur maison si demain matin, ils ont besoin de traitement de chimiothérapie. Donc la santé, l'éducation sont des priorités, ça doit continuer d'être accessible. Et je crois que ce que j'ai entendu qui a eu le plus de résonance pour moi sur ce panel, je crois que c'est Sébastien ou Graham qui l'a dit, c'est le droit d'exister pour ces communautés anglophones. Et ça, on ne peut pas l'oublier. On parlait de populisme tout à l'heure. Je pense qu'on doit être inquiet lorsque ce droit d'exister est attaqué. We can't clutch our pearls looking at the US because they're banning books, when in reality, we have a little version of that here when you're making universities less accessible. That's what you're doing.
Merci. Val?
I think part of the challenge here, honestly, if I'm listening to this conversation, is that the majority of this conversation, and to be clear, I agree with all of it, is inaccessible to the majority of people in this province. Mm-hmm. This conversation today, which matters a lot, is not going to resonate with very many people outside of this room, I would argue. So I come back to where we started. If you're, as they should be in Canada and as they should be in Quebec, publicly funded higher education institutions, public money then requires demonstrated public good to justify that everyone's taxes, whether you go to higher ed or not, are justified to be spent in that way. And I don't think just telling our stories better, there are new stories that need to be told. Someone said up here that the role of universities has changed significantly over the last 30 or 40 years. I would argue, again, respectfully, that the communications about the value of the university and how it continues to play a role in society has not kept up with that changing role itself. And you can debate numbers and talk about tuition, and I get it, and I have 3 degrees, I get it. But most people don't get this, and I think that's going to be what it comes down
to. So what's the message that hasn't kept up? What's the message that's not getting through? Are you saying?
Well, that's the $1.6 billion question, right?
Yeah.
If I had that, I would have started with that for everyone, but.
So, dernier tour de table parce que on a plus de temps. Donc la question, the question is, so where do you go from here? What is the priority? How do we fix this? Graham.
So I'm actually going to pick up on what Val just said about the universities not doing a good job of telling their stories. I think we're in a different reality in 2024, and Martin, you made reference to the former president of Harvard. I think the other challenge we face is that there are other groups in society that are telling stories about universities. Yeah. And those stories that are being told increasingly about universities don't correspond to our reality. And some of those stories have a very political agenda, which is not in the interests of what I think those of us who believe in a liberal education and science-based public policy want to defend. And I think that, for me, is another factor in all of this. It is how we respond to the perception, increasingly, that universities are a soft target. And I'm very concerned about that.
Merci.
Well, the experience we had at Bishop's was to me very telling, and I think that's the way we need to go. So when the whole community came together in defense of our university, that's when things changed. And certainly the lesson is clear. I think that's what we need to do. We need to gain greater proximity with the community. And we can't be concentrating our efforts on those that are university educated. We need to be a place where the whole community can come and where the whole community feels they're welcomed and that they're a part of what we're doing and that they're the reasons we're doing it. So I think proximity to community, and that goes in communication, but I think as well being accessible, and that's for all of us that work in universities, to not give the impression that we're in this ivory tower and that we're in some way superior. We gotta make sure that we're responsive and we inscribe ourselves as part of our community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Seni?
I'll make 2 quick points. Le premier, qu'au Québec, la protection et la valorisation du français, c'est un enjeu fondamental. et je le crois. Mais notre effort pour protéger le français et pour promouvoir le français ne doit pas passer par la fragmentation de nos piliers de société. C'est très important. The second thing I would say that I totally agree that universities could tell the story of our contributions to the society better. But the society itself also has to get up and tell the story of the role of universities, because the society is the beneficiary of it. And to be perfectly honest and with full respect, in the present situation that we're going through, the silence of the society on this subject, particularly the silence of our business and industrial sector, has been deafening.
First, when I spoke before about the right to exist for the Anglophone community, I say that as a Francophone and as a Francophile. I agree with Sébastien that there's work to do with the community to get closer. You need the public buy-in. And then guess what? There's an election either next year or in 2 years. I realize that tuition is not really what most people scratch their heads about at the kitchen table. There are bills to pay. Everybody's mortgages are up. I understand that. But it's really about investing in the what's next, right? The future. So if I hear more about deans, I'll think about tuition more come election time. So there is that work to be done, and I'll help you in that. That's my business, communication. And I'll say this about what Deep said about how silent the business community has been. Business leaders have more influence than politicians. People trust their CEO more than they trust the person they voted for. So the business community has a social responsibility. And like you, Deep, I am shocked by the silence of the business community. I am shocked that our mayor hasn't fought harder. But I think if we expect, si on exige plus de nos élus, so that means next time we vote, whether it's the municipal level or provincial level, we have to think about that. For whom is education a priority? And that should be one of the most important considerations for who we decide to elect. Yes.
Being the only one up here who doesn't currently live in Montreal, I feel, yeah, I feel like Montreal. But I did live here for a lot of years. I feel like I want to say something a bit broader than just about how I don't know the situation in Montreal or in Quebec. I'm disappointed to hear that there hasn't been more engagement from the business community. I would put forward that our group is one nationally, at least, who can help. We are currently talking to all of our post-secondary presidents from coast to coast, and every single one has said we need to re-engage the champions who aren't us to make the case for why we're such an important part of society these days. And so our commitment, given that we're the only group in Canada that really does bring together all of those players, would be to bring our members together. Heads up, members, our next members meeting is going to be exactly this, to test the messaging and help figure out how other groups get the college folks and get the business folks to figure out what that message is that makes sense to them, and that given we quote the Edelman Trust Barometer all of the time, that people are looking to their business leaders and looking to institutional leaders still. So let's not make it so they have to do all of that on their own, and provide them with the resources and supports to make that easier for them to make a compelling argument for what we know to be true.
Val Walker, Martine Saint-Victor, Deep Saini, Sébastien Lebel-Grenier et Graham Carr, merci beaucoup. Merci de votre présence et de votre attention, et bonne journée.
Bon, alors, je veux vous dire qu'il y a une réception dans quelques minutes hein, avec des choses à boire, à manger. Il n'y a pas de période de questions formelle, mais vous pouvez toujours approcher nos panélistes si vous avez des questions à leur poser, on ne sait jamais. Ils ne vous mangeront pas, je pense, quoi qu'il il va y avoir de la nourriture, alors ils vont avoir quelque chose à manger déjà. Je voudrais les remercier encore une fois, évidemment. Donc, Graham Carr, Sébastien Lebel-Grenier, Deep Saini, Martine Saint-Victor, Val Walker et notre animatrice, Francine Pelletier. Je pense que ça a été une discussion très fructueuse. C'est d'ailleurs filmé par CIPAC, donc vous allez pouvoir regarder ça à la télé plus tard et ça va être aussi sur notre chaîne YouTube. Donc, on va partager ça sur les médias sociaux. Donc, vous pouvez vraiment envoyer ça à vos amis ou même à vos ennemis si vous voulez, mais pour les éduquer. Bon, c'est ce que les universités font, hein? On éduque en partie, c'est ce qu'on fait, on fait autre chose aussi. So, I'm the man standing between you and the reception, but I want to plug a few of our forthcoming events here at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. But before that, I really want to thank Céline Cooper and her team. I think that, you know, and, you know, this consortium, in French, le consortium des cégeps, collèges et universités d'expression anglaise du Québec, of course, co-organized this event with us, and I think they play a major role here in this province, and I think we should recognize that. So in terms of our forthcoming event at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, well, I will mention just two that are related to the rise of populism and the future of democracy. See, it's timely, right? We do timely things, right? Like this event today. We have an event on March 25th at University of Quebec at Montreal, actually, organized with the Center for the Study of Democratic Citizenship, which gathers students of political behavior from all across Quebec, from all different major universities. And that will be a bilingual event, again, événement bilingue sur l'avenir, le statut, l'état de la démocratie au Québec et au Canada. So this event about the state of and the future of democracy will take place. It's an all-day long workshop on March 25th. And we have also another big event on April 8th, the first conversation sponsored by Charles Bronfman. And it will be, it's an event that's titled The Demise of the Threat to Civility and the Fight for Liberal Democracy. Okay? And there will be Judge Rosalie Abella, Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Luis Roberto Barroso, and Vika Swarup, former Indian diplomat and also the author of Slumdog, sorry. That's my French. Slumdog. What did I say? Smogdog? Yes, okay. Slumdog, which is I watched the movie and it's also a great novel, right? Of course. Slumdog Millionaire. I mean, Smogdog Millionaire might be a Montreal version of the novel, right? When we have smog. All right. Well, I think it's time to say again, thank you for you. Merci d'être venu ici. Vous fait discuter durant la réception. Vous pouvez poser les questions durant la réception parce qu'un de nos invités doit partir. Alors, il a un autre événement. Alors, il faut qu'on vous libère. Mais merci beaucoup d'être venu. Thank you very much. And enjoy the reception. Bye-bye.